1950s were the first point where the general public truly realised that they were starting to live in a science fiction world. There were bombs that could destroy the planet, planes that could fly faster than sound, the broad distribution of television, and the changes it made to social habits. Russia launched a beeping metal ball into orbit around the Earth. Science fiction objects became as close as your living room and as distant as the sky, but they existed for the first time in the world. The 1950s was a strange decade. It was both technophobic and technophilic. People feared nuclear war but loved technological innovation and gadgets. Everything from car design to commercial architecture reflected this optimism that stood side by side with home bomb shelters and Geiger counters. 1950 science fiction movies also reflected this ideological tension, so let's get going and look at a few science fiction hidden gems from the 1950s. Produced by Ivan Tors, who a decade later gave us Flipper, GOG is the third in a loose trilogy of science fiction films about the Office of Scientific Investigation. The other movies are The Magnetic Monster from 1953 and Riders to the Stars in 1954. This may be the first movie about computer hacking. A US research facility hidden underground in the New Mexico desert experiences some nasty deaths of their scientists. By nasty, I mean frozen to death and shattered. Dr. David Shepard, played by 1950s beefcake Richard Egan, is sent to investigate the murders. This gives the movie a chance to show off all the groovy 1950s scientific discoveries being made: solar-powered death rays, killer robots, human centrifuges, and Novak, a computer whose creators don't entirely understand it. With great sets and props and competent acting, GOG is at the peak of the design aesthetic known as atom punk. It has a fully restored Kino Lorber Blu-ray release, where you have the option of both the 3D and HD versions of the film. 1954 was peak 3D, so you should check this one out. Directed by Kurt Newman, who also gave us the original gangster version of The Fly, Kronos is plagued with some basic special effects in places, but it punches above its weight. It features yet another research station, and this one finds out that what they think is an asteroid on a collision course with the Earth is actually something else. The scientists, played by Jeff Morrow, Barbara Lawrence, and George O'Hanlon — George O'Hanlon, by the way, was the voice of George Jetson in the original cartoons — don't know that their boss, played by John Emery, has been taken over by the aliens controlling the object approaching the Earth. This not an asteroid crashes into the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Mexico and reveals itself to be a giant alien machine dubbed Kronos, which wants to suck all the power on Earth because, brilliant though they are, the aliens don't realise that every star is a better source of power than some weak-ass civilization that has only just discovered atomic energy. Leaving that aside, the movie romps along nicely, with the scientists landing a helicopter on top of the machine and getting a glimpse inside before it starts moving across the landscape, sucking up all the juice from power stations and a nuclear weapon that the authorities unwisely drop on it. Kronos gets a lot of things right. The astrophysicist's talk is fairly accurate, the acting is great, and apart from the aforementioned dodgy special effects, it does at least as well as some of the much more expensive alien invasion movies of its time. Being an independent film, it doesn't get the love that bigger films have, but it's a righteous piece of 1950s science fiction that you might enjoy. This is the best science fiction movie that Alec Guinness ever appeared in. I won't enter into any discussion to the contrary. This Ealing comedy, co-starring the luminous Joan Greenwood, Cecil Parker, and Ernest Thesiger, whom we all know and love from The Bride of Frankenstein, is a hoot. It satirises capitalism, unionism, class distinctions, and post-war British society. Sydney Stratton, a humble research chemist working for a textile mill in the north of England, invents a slightly luminous white fabric which never gets dirty and can't be destroyed. Vested interests try to get Sydney to sign over the rights to his discovery so it can be buried. Union leaders, realising that this new discovery will destroy jobs in the mills, rally against him as well. Only the mill owner's daughter Daphne and one of the mill workers Bertha believe in Sydney. Sydney's white suit is a classic disruptive technology, an innovation that comes from an outlier and potentially changes everything about the world. It's a single-breasted paradigm shift that radiates anarchy and fear in vested interests. Post-war Britain was a time of social change and just a little breaking down of the straitjackets of class structures. Cinema was at the forefront of this slight and partial revolution, and has been since the 1930s when Gracie Fields and George Formby became the first working-class movie stars. The Man in the White Suit is hilarious, as many of the Alien comedies were, and Guinness's clueless genius is delightfully whimsical. Apart from being good science fiction, The Man in the White Suit is a highly recommended feel-good movie when you're feeling down. Remember that time when Lenny Bruce wrote a children's movie about a boy who is given a magical ray gun by a man from outer space? Well, he did. The centerpiece of the movie is an orphan called Timmy, played by 8-year-old George Foghorn Winslow, who had a deep, croaky voice and a great deadpan delivery.
I bet you ain't got a radar screen.
No, I haven't. But I got a TV set. 21-inch screen.
You wouldn't let me take my ray gun.
Well, you can take anything you want to.
Anything?
Anything.
Even Saul?
Saul, who is Saul?
My frog.
Oh, of course.
Timmy is obsessed with science fiction and spacemen, and during a visit to his orphanage by a TV space hero, he gets a ray gun which has unusual powers. It can stop a car, it can change the results of a poker game, and it can make people tell the truth. Timmy is adopted by the local Justice of the Peace, Amelia Brown, played by Spring Byington, who is a proto-feminist who doesn't take shit from anybody. Amelia's daughter June is played by Anne Francis 2 years before Forbidden Planet, and her boyfriend is played by John A.a.k.a, who was in half of the low-budget science fiction movies of the 1950s. Along with the local mayor, played by Charles Coburn, this merry crew fight to save the orphanage from the evil political machine of Big Bill Watkins. Timmy is a cool kid, and he genuinely acts like a kid and not as a plot contrivance, which is an added bonus to this film. The Rocket Man's a family-friendly comedy, which has a whimsical quirkiness about it, and characters that avoid cliche. It's worth checking out if you can find a copy of it. How many movies combine telepathy, mountain climbing, and giant tentacled aliens? Well, this one does. Forrest Tucker, who people know best for two things, one of which is that he starred in F Troop on TV in the 1960s, is a United Nations investigator who visits his friend Professor Cravette, played by Warren Mitchell using his own London Jewish accent, at an avalanche-proof observatory in the Swiss Alps. On the way there, he meets a pair of sisters, played by Jennifer Jane and Janet Munro, who do a mind-reading act in nightclubs. The telepathic sister Anne becomes mind-controlled by the alien creatures hiding within a permanent cloud on the mountainside. Eventually, the car-sized aliens attack the observatory and the village as they acclimatise to our atmosphere. Our two-fisted hero sees the slimy bastards off with Molotov cocktails and a napalm strike by Air Force jets. 1950 science fiction was full of these alien invasion movies that were told on a small scale due to small budgets, but there's an art to the goofiness here. Making the aliens look totally inhuman was always going to result in silly monsters, but a lesser film would have made the aliens European actors in silver jumpsuits. So props to the Trollenberg Terror for taking the road less travelled and making itself memorable. So there are the first 5 of my 1950s science fiction hidden gem movies. As always, please consider subscribing to the channel, leaving a like, hitting the notification bell, and if you want to, let me know what your science fiction hidden gems of the 50s are. Now, not all of the movies that I've mentioned are particularly obscure, but they're not really given much love when people think about 1950s science fiction. As always, please look after yourselves, watch some good science fiction movies, watch some bad science fiction movies, and I'll catch you next time.